Welcome everyone to this carer awareness session. This session has been made with the target audience as professionals working in healthcare settings, which may come across unpaid carers. So my name is Harriet Stevens. I'm the Carers Engagement Facilitator, and my role sits within the Dorset CCG and Dorset Healthcare NHS Trust. My job is to support the carers leads in GP practices. I'm a trained mental health nurse by background. I was working on an inpatient ward before I came to Bournemouth in March to do this role.
Hi, my name is Jackie Wilson, and I've been an expert by experience now for about 6 years. I'm a full-time unpaid carer for my sister who has Down syndrome, and until recently a carer for my stepfather who had mixed dementias and a variety of medical conditions. One of the main reasons for undertaking this role is some of my caring experiences were rather negative, and I would like to be able to help in making the experiences more positive.
Hello, I'm Trish McLennan. I'm an expert by experience and currently working with the Mental Health Forum on a project. I was a carer for my husband who had a diagnosis of frontal lobe dementia, and our son Dave, who had a diagnosis of emotionally unstable personality disorder and was under the care of the CMHT. My caring roles have been extremely difficult at times, and our journey has had positives and negatives along its path. I feel very passionate about the appropriate support for carers, especially when the person they care for is in crisis, along with also the well-being of the carer.
Hi, my name's Pat Wilkins. I'm a Carers Development Lead, and basically I work with teams across Dorset Healthcare to ensure that they are carer aware and support our carers.
So the aim of this session is to gain understanding and insight into what it's like to be a carer and their contribution to healthcare. This is broken down into the following objectives, which in summary are improving your knowledge of carers' role, understanding the impacts of the role, and increasing confidence in communicating with carers.
So what do we mean by a carer? And as you can see at the definition below, is a carer can literally be anybody who's providing unpaid, and this is excluding carers allowance, support to someone who couldn't manage without their help due to their illness, disability, frailty, mental health or substance misuse.
So we've heard what it means to be a carer. Now, who do we think can be a carer? Think for a second what comes to mind when we say carer. So the short answer is anyone. They can be any age, gender, background, ethnicity. There is no instruction manual to becoming a carer. It often just happens, and it can happen quite suddenly for a lot of people. Some carers do not realise they're in a caring role. They see themselves as wives, husbands, daughters, sons. Others may not want to admit that they're a carer. Some have been caring for many years, and some may have only been caring for a short time.
These are just a few facts about caring, and as you can read, you know, it's quite amazing when you look at, you know, 132 billion a year, and I think that number's been around for years. I think it's a lot more than that now. And in Dorset alone, you're looking at 11% of the population being carers, and that was before COVID-19.
Here are some statistics about young carers specifically. Yeah, as you can see, there's 800,000 school children in England are estimated to have a caring role. 1 in 20 actually miss school because of this role. 26% reported to have been bullied because of their caring role, and 39% of young carers that say nobody was aware of their caring role. Trish and Jack, have you got any experience to share of being a young carer?
My earliest memories of caring for my sister go back to being about 9 years old, and I had a very sturdy doll's pram, and my mother put my sister into my doll's pram and sent me off to the shops with a shopping list. My other earliest memories are also being told at school that they couldn't be friends with me because I had a weird sister. Overhearing some of my mum's conversations with her friends about the nasty comments from people about my sister really only helped my mum protect my sister even more. Like most siblings, I had to play with her while mum did the housework or made meals. Mum had to go back to work as Dad's business had failed and he was bankrupt due to a situation beyond his control. So I looked after my sister every afternoon coming home from school. During school holidays, because there was no such thing as nursery school for her, they wouldn't accept someone which was known at this time as Mongol. So I had to have her around all of the time. And this got really bad for me when I started getting interested in boys, because I was having to drag around my baby sister.
Yes, I haven't got any experience of being a young carer, but when my mother had a stroke, I did feel it was quite strange to start kind of initially being able to feed my mum, wash her face, do a bit of personal care. So I can understand, the difficulties that perhaps young carers have.
On this slide, we'll hear Trish and Jack's caring story. Jack, would you like to start, please?
My mum died suddenly in 2006, and we had to decide whether to take my sister on or put her into full-time care. At this time, she lived with my stepfather, who was relatively well. But we didn't hesitate to look after the pair of them. But over the years, we began to realise something funny was going on with my stepfather. And we would find him in all sorts of odd places where he'd fallen or something happened to him. And it got to a stage where we had no choice but to literally move in and start looking after them. It was difficult for both my husband and I to start off with. My husband was self-employed and I worked full-time. And it was hard in a way that we had to reorganize all of our lives into something to start looking after a parent that was ailing both medically and mentally, and also with my sister. Eventually, I found my way to St. John's, and I had invaluable first training with dementia and understanding the aging process. And there were some other really interesting topics that did come in useful along the line. And this is where I learned to lift. Nobody had told me how to lift my stepfather off the floor at any point, but it was St. John's that taught me how to lift and how to look after them and the things that affect people with dementia. And from this, I found my way to CRISP, which we'll talk a bit more about later on. But they are wonderful in supporting carers.
As I look back over the years of being a carer, I realise that I've been a carer for nearly a third of my life. Maybe that has shaped me. I'm definitely more confident, yet difficult situations nearly broke me. Dave's decline started around the age of 19, following another bullying incident. He was eventually diagnosed with emotionally unstable personality disorder. Dave decided to live independently around the age of 21. Although living independently when in crisis, it was to me that Dave always turned to, and my weeks were often filled with well-being checks, delivering food, and managing medication sometimes. In Dave's darkest periods, I was also his voice to the service, updating and looking for help. Initially, Dave's way of coping was to have many duvet days, but then the days turned to months. In these low despairing periods, Dave would be completely opposite. In one period, Dave was overdosing approximately every 2 weeks, each overdose requiring a hospital admission for treatment. So sometimes the voices in Dave's head would tell him to go to a high building or bridge to jump off. I had to use all my skills to keep him calm and encourage him to come away from the edge while making a 999 call on the other phone, as well as listening to Dave having a conversation with the voices in his head. After these episodes, I often used to go into a delayed shock. Dave also went missing as well. Often after a difficult period for Dave, the black cloud would suddenly lift and Dave would become hyperactive, which again required caring skills to manage. Dave did have settled periods where he lived life as normal. He was caring, very thoughtful, and enjoyed life. After a period of 3 years without an overdose, Dave relapsed by an overdose of 64 paracetamol. And in the last year of his young life, he made many attempts on his life. And in the last week, in just 4 days, he overdosed 3 times, each overdose requiring a hospital admission. Just 2 days after he was discharged from hospital, he travelled to Bristol and ended his life by jumping from Clifton's suspension bridge. Hugh's diagnosis of frontal lobe dementia was confirmed in 2012. Frontal lobe dementia is often a young person's diagnosis, and it was for Hugh. Frontal lobe dementia, based on my own experiences, at times very difficult to manage, and all types of traits develop. January 2015, Hugh started to have no concept of money, and whilst visiting his local club, he lost around £1,000 in one weekend. In the gambling machines, he simply could not understand why his money kept on vanishing. His confusion and violence was growing, and sadly, I became a victim of his violence. It was tough, and I know if Hugh had been well, he would have been mortified that he'd used violence towards me. Hugh was my rock and always a perfect gentleman. I protected Hugh, so I suffered the violence in silence. I know a phone dinner can be cleared up or broken objects swept up, but what was not easy to do was to mend my well-being. These outbursts had a huge detrimental effect upon me. Being frightened is a horrible feeling, but the confusion that was etched on Hugh's face was also so haunting, a complete opposite of Hugh's smile. As Hugh's illness progressed, I suffered with many sleepless nights leading to sleep deprivation. After a period of illness for myself, after my mother's death, and while Hugh was in respite, I finally realised that it was time to explore a full-time care for Hugh. It was a heart-wrenching decision for me to make, for Hugh to remain at the home he was having his respite care in. If I had to do it all again, I would but be slightly wiser. And yes, at times I did become the scary carer, but I only wanted what was best for the two people I love so dearly.
I was lucky with my job, as I could work from home and only having to travel to Europe once or twice every 2 or 3 weeks. And I worked out that it would be in London 1 week and in Europe the next week. But eventually I had no choice but to give up work to care for them. The major impact was on our lifestyle. With the loss of an income, a company car, our home, our long holidays, and very little assistance from anyone until we had a diagnosis of dementia. Sometimes I think the only difference with the job I do now and the job I did then is an E. And that E can make a real big difference to your life. And it's just life's lottery that is a change in circumstances.
Yes, I can understand the difficulties. I had to give up work early. I was just running on empty. I know for me, it was not the best financial decision, as I came into the age bracket of having a delayed government pension.
So this slide shows you just some of the impacts of caring, and they're quite big things. Trish, would you like to share some of the things that you feel around what's impacted on your life being a carer?
Yes, for the physical side, when Hugh could no longer drive, I had the car steering wheel grabbed by Hugh. It took all my strength to gain control of the car again. And over the years of caring, I've had to deal with some very difficult situations. Although they were not physical, I can clearly remember being physically shattered from the sheer stress of the situations I was dealing with, and maybe sometimes not recognised.
Jackie, did you have similar things around the physical side of things?
Once we had the diagnosis of dementia, doors started to open and we had OTs coming in with risk assessments. And at the OT's suggestion, we installed a wet room with thermostatically controlled taps, but it was a loss of a bathtub. But it helped maintain my stepfather's independence. There's also, every time I tried to do anything in this house, it was a big job. And it would always go wrong. Like the time I was trying to decorate his bedroom, and there was this big brown stain on the ceiling, and the ceiling fell down on my head. So it was really, apart from the stress of trying to manage someone with dementia, someone with Downs, I was having all of this modernisation to put up with it in the home. it had got into a really bad state as well.
Again, you know, emotionally, there was a massive impact on you there, would you say?
Huge, great impact emotionally. My stepfather, it was the same every single day. He would wake up at 2 a.m. and he would go for a shower and he'd wake the whole household up. His TV would go on with the last of the summer wine, and that is one program I now cannot stand. It would be on repeat. My husband would get up to go to work at 6:30, just when I'd gone back to sleep, and the day would start all over again. The TV playing the same channels, the same programs, his favourite DVDs, and every meal had to be on time. Every cup of tea had to be at the right time, and it was always the same conversation. My whole life revolved around the clock. I had to try and do the shopping, hoping there would be no traffic queues or no queue in the supermarkets. And I had to get home just in time for his routines. I'd learned early on that it was pointless to argue, and I just had to keep putting the yes or the no's in the appropriate place. I was now surviving on little sleep and sheer willpower. What started out to be a joke with my husband by picking up a wine bottle and looking at the level and saying, "Been a rough day, hasn't it, darling?" began to be reality. I was on antidepressants, sleeping tablets, and 1 to 2 bottles of wine to cope a day. Eventually, I realised things had to change. My GP and a lovely community nurse had been telling me this, but I didn't listen. I couldn't hear what they were telling me because it's the hardest decision to make, to have to put someone into care. Quite simply because no one can look after your loved ones like you can.
Yes, my caring roles took me to the point of utter exhaustion. In times of severe crisis for Dave, my phone was never switched off, and it was hard to find sleep when your mind is constantly whirling as to whether Dave had sadly taken his life. I often refer to my head at times as a washing machine. I can recall being asked how I felt. The only way to describe how I was feeling was that my head was like a washing machine with no programs and no reduced spin speed. My brain was constantly spinning and at times out of control. The nights became even more difficult. I also suffered panic attacks, especially in crowded places.
I love the analogy of the washing machine. I can really sort of relate to the you know, the mind just completely spinning and not stopping. That's a really good way of describing it, Trish. For both of you, did your relationships change with maybe family members or your social networks? Did they change when you obviously becoming a carer?
Mine changed dramatically. My husband and I had a very active social life. We'd started to learn to ballroom dance. We were going out with friends, dining out, parties. We had the badminton club. We had our holidays in our caravan and our cruises, which is why we'd started to learn to do ballroom dancing. But as our caring role increased, the first thing to go was the dancing. We made excuses for everything. Oh, just too tired tonight. It's been a rough day. I just want to sit down and put my feet up. They were all simple excuses. And it was the same with the badminton club. We gave that up. And the members started chasing us, saying, "Come on, just come to the pub with us and have a drink. You don't have to play badminton. Come back and play badminton." "Oh, I can't, I'm too tired." And bit by bit, friends were rejected till there wasn't a friend in sight. My husband still had his business, so he was seeing people all day long and often too tired to see any problems. And I wouldn't tell him of any problems because it was a sign of failure. Crisp and St. John's were the first ones to help, and Crisp still support us with activities and outings. And without them, we'd probably be lost.
And Trish, have you had similar experiences?
Yes, socially, and especially in Hugh's care, the social side of life could be challenging, as Hugh's outbursts were unpredictable. So I lessened our social activity together, which meant many more days spent at home. I also ceased going to the gym as I just could not find the time to do it. In Dave's care, if he was in crisis, I sometimes had to counsel arrangements at short notice. As far as relationships are concerned, decisions I made in relation to Hugh's care and for myself to have a break, to recharge, had severe consequences on my relationships with my brother and sisters, and today that is still not rectified.
And again, it just shows, you know, your whole life completely changes from the impacts of caring. It's really tough, isn't it? And you're not alone, I'm sure, with all of that.
So what is the value of working together with carers? There is a term that we like to use, the scary carer. Before my role as the carers engagement facilitator for GP practices, I was a mental health nurse on a busy inpatient ward. I myself have fallen guilty to perceiving a carer as a scary carer. You're busy, in demand and tired, a nurse, and you feel the last thing you need is someone coming in and asking you difficult questions. However, we need to recognise that with most carers, it's frustration, anger and fear that can make them seem difficult to deal with. They can possibly be the main person that holds the whole family together and feel out of control of the situation. They feel they're not listened to and are not included in the team that are providing the care for their loved one. There are ways to avoid the scary carer though. Jackie and Trish?
My sister is actually scared of injections. She has this phobia against them. And it's not the injection, the pain, or the drugs or anything. It's the needle. And we had to have treatment one day on a day ward in a hospital. And I told the nurse about this phobia. And I said, please do not show my sister the needle. This nurse, in her infinite wisdom, after I'd had to go to the bathroom, decided to take apart not only the hypodermic needle, but a cannula. And as I came out of the bathroom, all I could hear was my sister screaming. It took me ages to get her calmed down again. And this nurse, after I'd sort of said, why did you do this? Her answer was, well, she needs to face her fears. And I thought, well, yes, she does need to face her fears, but not then, not at that time. And it should be at her speed, not at your choosing. And obviously I wasn't very nice to this poor nurse. Another time we had to go to A&E with my sister, and there was this really nice doctor, and I told him about the phobia, and he said, okay, how do I get around it? I said, it's easy. I'll hide her face, I'll cuddle her, I'll talk to her. We started singing Let It Go from Frozen. The nurse joined in, the doctor got his blood, everybody was happy. And it's that simple to listen to us without, I can sort the problem out for you.
And Trish, have you similar experiences?
Yes, I have at the start of beginning to look for Hugh's care when it was time for full-time care. We're working with a social worker. The first option was supported housing for Hugh. That was warden assistant. Knowing Hugh best, I knew it wouldn't work for Hugh. He couldn't even boil a kettle safely. I listened carefully to the options, but then my words were, sorry, it's not happening. The reply was, well, I'm going to have to go and speak to my manager. And later they came back and said to me, no, after obviously speaking with Hugh, getting to know Hugh better, they realised that this option of going to warden assisted accommodation, would have been the wrong decision for Hugh. Had I not had a voice, then sadly Hugh would have gone to that accommodation with potentially severe consequences on his well-being and safety.
So again, it's so important, you know, listening to carers. They understand the person they care for. They know about the things they like, they dislike. So again, you know, it is so valuable to have them as a partner within that care for the person that they care for. It's really, really important.
But in summary, the advantages of working with our carers, they can provide the emotional and practical support to the cared for person. Like it's been said, they know that person's baseline. They've been with them 24/7. Potentially, professionals have only seen them for a short period of time, so they're better equipped to understand their baseline. And that if the carers know their baseline, which they do, they're more likely to identify relapse signatures maybe early on, and then we can intervene a bit quicker before a crisis hits. Carers also have better understanding of the person's likes and dislikes, and then can act as an advocate for that cared for person. And working with carers also means that they can support us with handling difficult conversations with the cared for person.
So Jackie and Trish, what information helps for a carer? You know, if you're talking to professionals, what are the things that you feel would help you as a carer to understand what's going on?
A lot of the time it's talking to us like we're a human being. We can understand what you're talking about, but we do need to know about the drugs, if the drug's going to cause any sort of side effects that may have an effect on us. And we will ask lots of questions. So we're not trying to be a nuisance. We're just trying to really understand for the best care for our cared for. The other things is returning phone calls. Please, if you promise to do something for us, please do it. Even if it's just to pick the phone back up and say, I'm terribly sorry, I haven't found the information, or he's on holiday, or whatever. Just phone us back and let us know what's going on. I've been known to go around the house with a mobile phone and a landline in each pocket, and that's even going into the loo. The other thing is just keep me up to date with the information and keep me informed. Don't tell the cared for, because sometimes, well, you can tell the cared for, obviously, but make sure I'm involved in it, because they could forget, and it could be something really vital, like a next appointment with the hospital or with the doctor. And if possible, can I have your email address or your mobile phone number? Because quite often as a carer, I forgot about things till 10 o'clock at night. And all of a sudden I had to, oh, I need this doing, I need that, or whatever. And I could actually send a text knowing full well that your phone's off. But in the morning, I used to get a message from my lovely community nurse who gave me this, who said, prescription on the way, it's all sorted, don't worry, I've done it. And it was really good, and it was really, really helpful. The other thing that can be really helpful is giving us leaflets, because yes, you're telling us about something, some new equipment or something that could be a benefit to us. But as you're talking, we're probably having to listen to the cared for at the same time. So if we have a leaflet or a little bit of paper that we can put away and then all of a sudden go, oh, yes, I know what that is brilliant.
I have to agree with having leaflets. When Hugh was first diagnosed, I had information given to me which I found really useful, that I could read it at my own leisure and in bite-sized pieces. At the time, you're dealing with the diagnosis and how it was going to change your life quite dramatically over the years. As far as involvement in multidisciplinary team meetings, I can understand often in a hospital setting they're called at short notice, but it is important, it's vital that the person's carer is there, because as in Dave's case, I was his voice when he was in crisis. He couldn't speak. Sadly, he didn't know whether to live or die. So it was important for me to be at those meetings, and also anybody else involved in his care as well.
The other thing that helps a lot as well is just a little bit of you. Sometimes it's just the porter that was pretending the bed was a racing car with my sister in, or the doctors who turn around and say, "Hello, gorgeous," to Michelle, or to the nurses who turn to me and say, "How are you coping? You've got it tough." And it's okay to cry, or to stick plasters with smiley faces on them, or picking up on family jokes and joining in with them. Like we had one with my sister with piggies that live in her tummy. And the nurse picked up on this family joke, and she turned around and she says, "Yes, and they're blue because they live in the dark," which was brilliant. Or the matron that talked to us as he got lost in the hospital, and he went out of his way to put us right again. And a sense of humour goes a long way, even though it's difficult to keep smiling all day long. And some of you have got really hard jobs to do. But if you smile and staying cheerful helps a lot. Thank you.
And I think you're right, Jackie. I think it's about, it is that, when you first meet someone, that smile can mean so much. I've talked to lots of carers where, they've maybe places where they've maybe just been ignored, and it's about that acknowledgement, and that smile just diffuses so much, and it makes you feel part, you've been seen, and it's really important. So thank you for both sharing that. Let's talk about confidentiality, because over the years, a lot of carers do come up against this. And what we say to professionals is use your common sense. You can listen to carers. They, as we've mentioned in previous slides, they have the knowledge of that person, and that's vital for you to know about, and also to listen to their concerns. That doesn't mean to say that you're breaching anybody's confidentiality. If the person has a diagnosis, you can talk about things generally. And again, it's about acknowledging that carer. And also, they might want to tell you things in confidence as well. And it's about respecting that. And I think we do get quite scared of that word, confidentiality. So again, as I said before, it's using your common sense around that.
So the next few slides, we're going to be focusing on primary care settings specifically. That many carers are not known to social services, but around 9 in 10 access primary care services, either visiting with the person they care for or reasons for themselves. So carers are also more likely to suffer from poor mental and physical health problems compared to non-carers. This is due to the lack of support, finance concerns, stress, and social isolation. This means that primary care services are ideally placed to identify carers, to register them, and to signpost them to information and support. So how do we go about identifying carers and GPs? Firstly, it's important to say that identifying carers is everybody's business. If all staff, i.e. the doctors, receptionists, pharmacists, etc., are carer aware and have received carer awareness training, they're more likely to identify carers opportunistically. There are many scenarios in which a staff member may pick up clues that someone is a carer. For example, when the carer and the cared for attend appointments together, when the carer makes an appointment on behalf of somebody else, or when the carer picks up a prescription on behalf of somebody else. It's about the staff being confident enough to ask the right questions and think carer. For example, when someone is complaining of backache, it may be after lots of questioning you discover it's due to the manual handling they're having to conduct because of a caring role. It's also important that the practice has the right displays and materials in the GP and online, which provide patients information on what is a carer and how important it is to inform your GP for support and information. So we've identified a carer. What do we do next? Each GP practice should have and update regularly a carers register. This is important as the practice can then offer advice, information and signposting to support the carers. Here is a list of some of the things the practice can offer. A source of support and advice. They can provide information on medical conditions and treatments for the cared for person, so the carer feels more knowledgeable and confident. They can arrange home visits where caring responsibilities makes it difficult for the carer to attend appointments in the GP practice. They can arrange double appointments. They can arrange for repeat prescriptions. They can offer priority appointments. They could offer additional mental health checks. They can offer groups and carers clinics, annual reviews, and also carers are entitled to free flu vaccinations. This is what they can offer also. So what happens when a GP practice supports its care as well? Are there benefits to the practice as well as the benefits to the carer? So recognising someone is a carer makes it easier for the practice to offer practical things like health checks and flu jabs, which then obviously maintains good physical health of the carer. Identification and registration of carer makes it easier to screen regularly for depression and other health problems, thus being able to implement early interventions and reduce the likelihood of prescribing costs and unnecessary long-term treatments. Improved carer health and well-being means a carer is more likely to be able to fill their caring role. So that's then in turn less demand on services. And improved carer health means there's less chance of the carer hitting a crisis point, therefore less likely of a breakdown in care. Trish and Jack, have you got any experiences with your GP practices as carers?
I have a wonderful GP, and I went to see him for a completely different reason. When I got in to see him, he asked how I was coping because he knew the family and the relationship within the family, and within seconds I was in tears. And it was amazing what he just did. He turned off his PC screen, he turned and did something to his telephone, turned around and put a coffee on his little Nespresso machine behind him. And he said, right, tell me all about it. Box of tissues, cup of coffee, half an hour later, just telling him everything. I came out of that GP practice not with any prescription for drugs or anything else, but an action plan of what I could do and where I could my next steps to be. That was absolutely fantastic. On the other side, we did have one doctor, not with the current practice that we're with now, who just sat typing at his typing. He didn't look at us. He didn't acknowledge my sister. He didn't do anything. He just typed basically and said questions. As we were on the way out of the office door, my sister said in a very loud voice, well, that was rude, wasn't it? So there are things that you can do to help us on there. Trisha, have you got any experiences?
Yes, before Dave moved out of the area, we had the same GP. I always felt that when I saw my GP, he understood the difficulties that I was going through, especially when Dave was in crisis, without breaking any confidentiality of Dave's care. And also, this is based on my own experiences when sadly the person has died, and especially in Dave's death, the impact of being a carer do simply not disappear. I'm fortunate to have an understanding GP who did not hand me a prescription but sat and listened and understood what I was coping with. By listening and talking to me, I began to understand that I needed further counselling.
So how do we know a GP practice identifies and supports its care as well? This NHS England accreditation scheme, called Supporting Carers in General Practice, a framework of quality markers, does just this. The framework provides practical guidance and ideas and a declaration template which can be used to demonstrate what the practice is already doing, but also recognises where there are areas to improve on. It's not a compulsory requirement, but the Care Quality Commission recognises and supports the use of it, and it contributes towards SU inspections. The quality markers ask general practice to identify 6 things: how it identifies and registers carers, how it offers holistic support for its carers, how it understands and responds to the needs of carers, how it makes it clear for carers to access its service, and how the practice communicates, involves and informs its carers, and finally how the practice promotes a carer-friendly culture. Each GP practice should have a designated carers lead. Anyone in the surgery can take on this role who has a passion in supporting their unpaid carers. Their role may involve the following: ensuring all staff at the surgery are able to identify, support and record a patient as a carer. They will make sure the practice holds a carers register and that this is being kept up to date. They'll endeavour to try and work with me, the carers engagement facilitator, in making the practice carer friendly using the quality markers on the previous slide. They will be responsible for displaying publicity in waiting areas and receptions, which encourages people to identify themselves as carers. They will make sure carers signposting information is available to all staff and patients, and that it's kept up to date. As professionals, we need to be aware that unpaid carers have rights under certain legislations. For adult carers, this is the Care Act, and for young carers, this is the Children and Families Act. So the Care Act gives carers the rights to the same recognition and respect as those they support. Their rights are of equal value. They have a legal right to support from their local authority through a carer's assessment. This is an assessment of the carer's own needs, and they can be given a written support plan from this. The carer gets a personal budget and direct payments from the local authority to pay for services. Carers have a statutory right to ask employers for flexible working. The Act also sets up statutory frameworks for safeguarding carers from neglect and abuse. The Children and Families Act, this is children and adult services must work together alongside other organisations to identify and support young carers. And the Act places a legal duty on authorities to provide an assessment of the young carers' needs in order that they have equal access to education, career choices and wider opportunities.
It's our responsibility as workers to consider safeguarding concerns, and carers and cared for are high risk of these types of abuse. Have you got anything you'd like to add to that?
Unfortunately, my stepfather became very demanding. He was rude, and he had a very nasty temper. Unfortunately, no one in the family saw this, as he only sort of did it when I was the only one around. I'm thinking about this now. I was abused, mostly verbally. He did threaten, and he controlled me by making his demands so that I turned up and did as I was told. He did threaten to throw things at me, but luckily I was faster than him and I could duck. Some people thought when we made the decision that we were letting him down, and they didn't think it was necessary to put him into care. And in fact, someone actually did tell me I was being irresponsible and uncaring by wanting to place him into care. Unfortunately, due to the dementia, my stepfather really did get very, very nasty. And he managed to get someone to believe in the assisted sheltered accommodation where he went that I'd taken all his money. And he managed to get me arrested for fraud. All charges were eventually dropped, but it was a very harrowing 9 months. Tricia, have you got anything to add for that?
With Hugh's diagnosis, yes, I did sadly suffer violence. It was quite difficult to deal with at times, and I had to find distraction techniques so it avoided the total confusion on his face. One of those was he loved sweeping up the lawn, so I used to drop rubbish onto the lawn, so that distracted him. It became very hard at times. I know I put myself at risk when going behind him when he was walking up the stairs, but what do? You're protecting the person that you care for and love. So it did become difficult. I was fortunate not to be injured. The only injury I received was substantial was when I broke his fall, and I put my foot out to stop his fall, and consequently I had a nasty bruised foot.
I think we need to listen to Trish and Jackie, because I think it's really important that we are aware as professionals, you know, of safeguarding issues, because it does happen all the time.
So listed here are the underpinning policies and strategies which influence how we work. These are the driving force in making sure services have a duty to look after its carers. So NHS England published their commitment to carers in 2014. This aims to give carers the recognition and support that they need to provide the invaluable care that they deliver. The NHS also published its 5-year forward view in 2014, which includes a commitment to providing more support to unpaid carers. Also in 2014, our Dorset Valuing Carers and Daughters strategy was created. This is Dorset's response to achieving what was set out in the 5-year forward view. The strategy is being developed with carers, Dorset councils, NHS trusts and the Dorset CCG. This strategic vision supports the creation of a single health and social care framework, i.e. the ICS, integrated care system. This will help to deliver improved services across Dorset for carers. The NHS long-term plan, published in 2019, outlines priorities for healthcare in the next 10 years, and carers are mentioned throughout this many times. In January 2020, the Supporting Adult Carers NICE guidelines aims to help health and social care providers identify and support carers and promotes partnership working. And finally, most recently, the NHS has published its People Plan 2020-2021, which has mention of carers at various points, including rolling out the Carers Passport for working carers. So here are the details of the 2 main organisations which offer support for carers across Dorset. They are the front door to all other support and information available to unpaid carers in Dorset. They both work closely with the local authority in the area that they're in. So for if the cared for person lives in the Dorset Council area, their organisation is Carers Support Dorset, and CRISP is if the cared for person lives within the Bournemouth and Christchurch Poole Council area. Everyone needs to be referring unpaid carers in their direction. We can offer the carer their contact details and then they can self-refer, but also we can alternatively get consent from the carer and do a third-party referral, on their website. This is done via a 2-minute form on their website and can be completed by any staff member. There are also many other organisations that work to support unpaid carers, such as Rethink Carers UK and Leonardo Trust. These are just a few examples. We'll have more information on this at the end of this webinar, where you can find links for the third-party referrals and details of further support organisations.
There's a lovely book, a booklet available called One Carer's Experience, If Only I'd Known That, by Sue Hartnell Bevis. And in there is a quote that says, all carers are like camels. No, it's not that they've always got the hump. It's just that there's always one last straw that breaks them. And I'd like to say that the only way we can change a system is with people learning and helping and understanding to work with carers and not be the last straw that breaks us.
Thank you, Jackie. So thank you very much for listening, and we hope this webinar was informative and useful. Please feel free to contact us if you have any questions. Myself and Pat's details are on the slide there, and if you've got any questions for our experts by experience, Trish or Jack, please do contact myself or Pat.